Hello, welcome once again to Pale Blooms and Beyond. Thank you for joining me today. Liverpudlian singer, songwriter, musician Tony Hazzard is most renowned for the songs he's written for other artists. And the list is long. Richard Barnes, Herman's Hermits, the Hollies, Lulu, Manfred Mann, Gene Pitney, Swinging Blue Jeans, the Tremeloes, Andy Williams, the Yardbirds. Those are just some of the noteworthy ones. His song, Fox on the Run, has been recorded by many bluegrass artists. Tony's song, The Sound of the Candyman's Trumpet, was recorded by Cliff Richard and entered in 1968's Songs for Europe. He also sang backing vocals on two of Elton John's early albums. Beginning in 1969 through 1973, Tony recorded 3 solo albums. Add to that an album with Richard Barnes in 1976 and 3 more solo albums from 2011 to this year's demonstration. Toss in double-digit singles and EPs over the years, and it's a nice catalog of material. And last year, Tony wrote and self-published a book, Selected Lyrics, a collection of his lyrics from the last 50 years. Well, welcome, Tony.
Thanks, Greg.
Take us back to your childhood. What do you recall growing up in Liverpool?
Oh golly, what do I recall? It was the 40s and the 50s, so it was just after the war. So I just remember things being very different from how they are today. We didn't have a television or a fridge or a car or any of the mod cons. We had one single fireplace, and that was it. No central heating. But it was quite interesting growing up. I don't know what else to say. It was just my life, like everybody's lives growing up.
Did you play in any of the bombed out buildings from World War II?
No, there was a bomb crater not far away, which had turned into a very large pond, and I used to go and collect tadpoles and sticklebacks and things like that.
Mm-hmm. Do you remember any music being played, or did you hear any music in the household? Or
yes, but it was all very sort of oldie-fashioned, I would say. I remember Guy Mitchell. What was there? I mean, we had a wind-up gramophone with 78 records. So we had the Sid Phillips Dixieland Band and things like that.
Were either one of your parents musically inclined?
No, not at all. No. My father used to play the piano with one finger.
Is that right?
Yeah. He'd entertain himself for hours. But the other thing I remember, I was right on the outskirts of Liverpool. There's a place called Rain Hill, and not far from there was Burton Wood Air Base. So I used to see flying fortresses taking off and landing quite a lot, and go to air shows there.
Oh, that would be interesting.
Yeah.
Did you you and your parents ever sing together or do any of that?
No. I was in the church choir. I used to go to choir practice twice a week and sang in the choir.
Okay. Did you enjoy that?
Yeah.
Help strengthen your vocal cords a little bit. Can you recall one of the first album or 78 or single that someone got for you, or that you bought?
Let me think.
Mm-hmm.
Golly, what was? I remember buying a single by Lonnie Donegan. Everybody was into Lonnie Donegan and Skiffle at the time.
Uh-huh.
And we all were. The Beatles were. Everybody was.
Right.
So I remember buying Lonnie Donegan records, and a friend of mine used to buy Little Richard records.
Mm.
Um, I think that was about it, really.
Yeah, I've heard that in a few of the interviews I've done. Little Richard, how influential he was.
Yeah.
And I remember one interview, the man said he thought he was actually little, for Little Richard.
Yeah.
A really short man.
I thought he was incredible. When you look at punk, and people with punk were saying, how outrageous they are. But there was Little Richard in the 50s being black and outrageously gay, right, and just ignoring the whole thing and just doing it. It was great. I didn't appreciate the records at the time as much as I did later on. I think I liked them much more later.
I think that's true. That with myself too, is a lot of the music that I used to ignore or not really take to, a long time ago. With time, you learn to appreciate it a little bit.
Yeah.
Yeah. What are some other some musicians or artists that you liked as a teenager?
Clearly, the Everly Brothers, but Buddy Holly. They were the two main ones, absolutely.
Oh yeah. Everly Brothers for sure. They're harmonizing. I think that's. Yeah. I know how the Hollies were really heavily into as well. So they had that nice sound.
And the Beatles as well. They were into the Everlys too.
Yeah. Well, let me ask you about that. Speaking of the Beatles, where you grew up, was it anywhere close to where any of the Beatles lived or grew up?
Not just a few miles away, I suppose. Yeah.
Did you ever have any run-in with any of the?
No. I mean, I saw them at the Cavern. Mm-hmm. I used to go to the concerts, usually at lunchtime at the Cavern. But at the time, we didn't think of them. They were fine, but there were other groups I and some others thought were better, much more polished. Whereas the Beatles were very sort of, they were just back from Hamburg wearing their leathers, and John Lennon was leaning on the piano looking at the audience quite aggressively. That was because he couldn't actually see them. He wasn't wearing glasses.
How interesting. Yeah. I like to hear those kind of stories about the early days. And before a band made it. I like to hear those.
Yeah.
Were you ever part of an actual band?
Yeah, I had a little band when I was probably 16, 17. There were just two of us. I played lead and rhythm, as it were. And we didn't have a bass player. He played a rhythm guitar, but with the lower frequencies boosted. And we had a drummer who was my best friend, and we used to take the drums on the bus to go to gigs. we only played locally because of that, but we played at regular dances. Yeah.
So that was.
If I hadn't gone to university, I would have been in a Liverpool band. We were in the Cavern one day, and Bob Wooler, the DJ, said, "If there are any bands in here that would like to play, come in and see me." Mm-hmm. And I said to my friend Graham, "I don't think we're good enough yet. We ought to hang on for a bit." So we never did.
Yeah.
And I shot off to university and then joined bands there.
Yeah. We'll talk a little bit about that. You did graduate from university.
Just about.
Okay.
I failed the Latin paper in finals.
Oh, is that right? Okay.
Yeah, and we had 5 set books to study, and I'd studied half of one of them. So I failed the set book paper and had to do resits in September. And then I only studied 1.5 of the set books, but I managed to pass.
Oh, okay.
But yeah, once I was playing, that's all I wanted to do. I didn't know what to do. My father used to write to me and say, "What are you going to do?" Mm-hmm. And in those days, it didn't really matter. You could walk into a job with a degree. And then the drummer came to us one day and said, "Why don't we go pro?" So the bells rang and the lights went on, and I thought, that's what I'm going to do.
Mm-hmm.
And my father said, I'll support you for a year,
Okay.
which actually meant sending me a £1 note every few months.
Well, that's good. Yeah. I mean, at least he was encouraging there early on. You know, you hear a lot of parents that say that you'll never make anything of yourself. You'll never survive as a musician. You know, they're discouraging. So
yeah, no, he was very supportive.
Good.
I never forget one. I'd gone back to Liverpool, having been living in London, and at that time I was great friends with the Swinging Blue Jeans.
Okay.
And we arranged to meet at the pub round the corner. I was there with my father, and they were off to Mr. Smith's in Manchester to play. I said, well, I can't, my dad's here. And they said, bring him along. So there I was, 1 o'clock in the morning, Mr. Smith's, drinking Guinness with my dad. I can't remember how we got home, but we did.
Well, that was good. You got to bond a little bit with your dad. Yeah. How interesting. Well, you, I guess a little bit later on, you started out as a solo artist on Ready, Steady, Go and Thank Your Lucky Stars.
Yeah.
Do you remember what songs you did sing?
Yes, it was the first single, You Never Put Shackles on Me.
Okay.
Which that came out about the same time as You Won't Be Leaving with Herman's Hermits.
Okay.
And I can't remember much about it, but yeah. So we did Ready, Steady, Go was live, and Thank Your Lucky Stars was with a just miming. I also did some children's shows as well in Manchester.
Is that right? Do you remember any of those?
Yeah, there was a thing called 5 O'Clock Club.
Mm-hmm.
And the producer and the presenter was Muriel Young. I said to her, your name is one I can never pronounce. It makes me sound as though I'm drunk. Muriel Young. She was lovely. She was very nice. I think the earliest time I played live was in Rainhill Village. They had a social, I think, and with lots of different acts. And I recorded a backing track. This is I must have been 14, I think. I recorded a backing track on an old tape recorder. And then I was going to play the lead with live with a backing track. And they announced me as, this is next act is Tony Hazzard, who's going to play with himself. I don't remember anyone laughing at the time, but I've laughed a lot since.
What an introduction. Oh gosh. I wonder if the individual was like, oh, what did I just say? That's funny. That's funny. When did you, what age or do you recall when you seriously started writing songs?
I think it was at university when I was playing with the band and wrote some songs there. And although what we did with the band was very, very different. We were doing a lot of bluesy stuff. We would do Ray Charles and Jimmy Reed. And my stuff was slightly different. But we did some of those things live when we were later on as well. So that's when I started writing.
Where did a lot of the inspiration for your songs come from?
It varied. It varied. Sometimes I think I say it in my lyric book. That's the best. I mean, I'll just have a quick look. What did I say?
Sure.
Oh, that's it. For me, a song arises in one of 4 ways. It comes straight from the heart. It was inspired by a real person or people and has echoes of the truth, but is fiction. It is sparked by a phrase which comes to mind or which someone else has written or said. and 4, it arises purely from the imagination. So sometimes people in interviews would think that some songs were full of meaning and based on a reality. I used to take part in songwriting workshops, and the tutors all had to play a song, and I played one song, and somebody afterwards came up and said that was really good. That was clearly really from the heart. I said, well, I'm sorry, but that was purely made up out of my imagination.
Only the writer knows for sure where it came from. Is there a particular time of day or in your past that you're more inspired, or maybe the juices are flowing more?
No, I remember sort of perhaps late at night, I'll get an idea and then go to bed and get very excited to work on it again the next morning. I remember that happening. But after You Won't Believing, I found it difficult to write anything worthwhile for about a year. I just had a very dry period. And then suddenly it all started happening. And virtually everything I wrote got recorded. So I was very lucky. Lots of it's down to luck, I think.
Right. And the inspiration, when it strikes you, it can't be forced,
No, some people, I had friends later on who would write, during office hours, as it were. They'd meet at 9 o'clock and work till 5 o'clock and write 4 or 5 songs in a day. I could never do that. Some songs would take weeks and weeks. And I at one point later on, I started one song in the 80s and didn't finish it until the 2000s.
Let me ask you this. Are there any songs that you've written that even today you didn't think were quite finished?
Quite finished?
Yeah, that you still thought that it wasn't quite a complete song.
No, the only thing I can remember is recording in the early 80s and forgetting what I recorded. We were going to do an album, and it never happened, but we started recording, and I later found a copy master, and so I put 6 of the tracks out. But when I was doing songs from the liner, I couldn't remember I'd recorded this song. It was Take It While the Moment Lasts. It was it. Can't remember. Anyway, I couldn't remember what the third verse was, or the second verse. So I wrote a new one. And then later I discovered I'd never written a second verse.
Oh, okay.
So there are 2 versions of that, one with a second verse and one without.
Wow. Okay.
And they're very, very different. Yeah.
Yes. Well, talk about who was instrumental in the early days, helping you get your songs around to different artists?
Well, that was really the publisher, or really the publisher's wife, Lillian. Okay. She was a real sort of, I call her a Jewish Boadicea. She was very tall and very, very assertive, quite scary. But she was very enthusiastic, and so she would take acetates to people to play. So she was largely instrumental in getting a lot of things. I mean, Manfred Mann was managed by Jerry Braun, who I was with, but Manfred was very fussy about recording other people's songs. He didn't like finished demos. He liked very basic, rough ones, so he could put his stamp on it. And I used to do quite polished demos. So the fact that we shared a manager, an agent, and publisher didn't go in any way to helping me get a song placed with Manfred. He would make his own mind up. It didn't matter that it was, if he thought it was commercial, although Manfred didn't actually like pop music anyway. He was really a jazzer. So I think he used to record these things under duress because they were commercial.
Well, you may have already mentioned this, but who was the first artist to record one of your songs?
Yeah, he was Herman's Hermits. Yeah, produced by Mickey Most, and Mickey then became a fan of what I was doing, and did quite a lot, several other tracks with other people.
Okay, yeah, that's a good at that time someone to get in good with, Mickey Most.
Yeah.
What song and artist singing your song got the highest chart placing?
It depends where in the world you're talking about. Hazzard the Clown was #1 twice in Germany.
Okay.
So it went to #1, went down, and then went back up again. I think that was probably the best. And I get more royalties, from Germany and Austria for that song. That's still very popular there, or it was. I can't believe anything still is, because they're all over 50 years old.
But you'd be surprised, some of the young listeners being exposed to, musicians that recorded decades ago.
Yeah.
And how they latch onto it and appreciate it. I think good songs will travel through time.
Yeah.
So, and that's interesting too, to hear, how songs recorded either UK or America, how they become popular in different countries. I've always found that.
Yeah.
That's very interesting, how it touches a chord with the people in those countries. That's interesting.
I was really fed up because you won't believe it was going to be an A-side in America. And at the last minute they switched it over. So I lost out on that. Sorry, I interrupted you.
No. That's another issue too, when the suits decide on the A and the B side, which is going to be the hit. And I oftentimes prefer the B side, and I think the artist a lot of times too. So that's so always flip it over, right? Always listen to the other side. Which song of yours was covered by most artists?
Golly. Well, obviously it's Fox on the Run.
Right.
Because of all the bluegrass, so many bluegrass bands have done it.
Right.
I don't know I'm not sure where the royalties go, because sometimes I get far more royalties in for Hazzard the Clown in Europe than there's not as much coming from America. So I'm wondering whether, because the band The Sweet did a single called Fox on the Run.
Right. Totally different song.
Totally different song. I didn't think it was, well, I better not say, but I thought it was a bit silly doing. There's no copyright on titles, but if something's quite distinctive, if I wrote a song called Michelle or Yesterday, I'd think, hang on a minute, probably this isn't a good idea. And I thought Fox on the Run was so distinctive a title. You think, well, you wouldn't do it again, but there we are. So I'm not sure whether some of the royalties that should be coming to me are going to what's left of The Sweet.
Right.
I don't know.
That's very interesting, because that was my question coming up. There are actually 3 songs that other artists wrote with the exact same title. Fox on the Run, you mentioned. Hello, It's Me, Todd Rundgren.
Oh yes, I've seen that.
And you wrote yours before Todd Rundgren, so again, it would have been a case of him, taking your song.
Well, he probably did. He probably hadn't heard it. It just seemed to be a
right. But then what about Brown Eyed Girl? Van
oh
Morrison.
yeah. I don't know when he wrote that, but I know.
Yeah, go ahead.
I know that mine was written without having heard his.
Right.
It was a totally different song. I remember why it was written, what inspired it.
Right. So totally different songs, and that's what you brought up about. I can't understand why the copyrights didn't interfere with those and say, what's going on here, or at least look into it.
Yeah.
I thought that was interesting. But they're all different songs, completely different. Which artist's version of your songs are the closest to how you imagine the song sounding?
Probably the Hollies, Listen to Me. Yeah. Yeah, Graham Nash was very keen on it.
Mm-hmm.
Keen on my stuff. And then, so they recorded that and then he left.
Mm-hmm. Right. Yeah, he was very much infatuated with that West Coast.
Yeah.
Sound. Yeah. Are there any songs that you've written that were not covered but you wished someone had covered?
I've got songs that there's one particular song. Yeah, there's a song called "I'll Be Still in Love with You," which I think is one of my best.
It's a great song, yeah.
But nobody's. Oh, wait a minute! I think Gene Pitney recorded it.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't know that until a few years ago. I was doing an interview for BBC Radio Liverpool was being interviewed, and they played it, and I didn't know it. I couldn't remember that he'd recorded it.
Mm-hmm.
There's another song. Oh, I think I'm Getting Over You was recorded by an Italian singer whose name, sorry, it now escapes me, but she rearranged it, but did a very good version. It sounds very nice in Italian.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you just touched on two of my favorite songs of yours. One of my all-time favorites, though, is "Take to the Mountains." And Richard Barnes' version.
Yeah,
that's just a wonderful.
It's a great shame because when that was put out, it was very, very popular, but there was a strike at Philips factory, and people couldn't buy it. Many years later, I was doing a gig at a festival and mentioned that, and somebody in the audience came up to me afterwards and said, "I worked in the Philips factory, and I remember that happening, and you're absolutely right." So it should have been a big hit, and it wasn't, because people couldn't buy it.
Right.
One DJ played it on Capital Radio every Sunday. I met him on the station, railway station, and he was an actor, and I said, "Thank you for playing it." He said, "Well, that's all right. It's a lovely song."
Yes, it is.
That was based on reality too.
Yeah. There again, the great quality songs are going to reach the audience one way or the other. And I don't remember how I first heard that, but a few years ago. But yeah, it hit me right away. It was like wonderful. Of course, Richard Barnes' vocals,
yeah,
they're great on that too. Well, you went off a foray into writing TV jingles. What was that experience like?
Hilarious sometimes, because the clients would not ready. I remember the client coming to recording sessions saying, "Would it be possible to have a harpsichord on it?" And I said, "No, you have to book a harpsichord the day before in the studio and have it tuned. Otherwise, it won't work." So that shut him up. It was quite fun to do. And for some of them, I got Mike Batt to write. If I wanted a brass arrangement or string arrangement, I get Mike to do it, because Mike was very keen on it. And then he thought, if Tony's writing these jingles, so can I. And I thought, if Mike's doing these arrangements, so can I. So I started writing, well, not a lot of arrangements, but I wrote some, especially string parts. Yeah.
Yeah. Well,
So yeah,
go ahead.
so it was quite lucrative to the jingles,
Right.
but I didn't do it for long. There were
Mhm.
also it was. I remember we did one for J cloths. I don't know if you have J cloths. It's like cloth for wiping the kitchen work surfaces. But
Okay.
J cloth was a trade name, so in the jingle you had to say J cloth cloth. Yes, it's a J cloth cloth.
Oh, it's a J cloth. Okay.
I can still remember the jingle now. And there was one jingle I did which I really liked, and I never put it out. It was for Chivers Jellies.
Okay.
I thought it'd be really nice to use a wobble board, and the song was "Get the giant jelly get the giant jelly taste, get the Chivers shivers. It's a real cool taste, get the Chivers shivers." So I had this wobble board going. Whoop, 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 whoop. It was a really good jingle. It never went out. They changed the whole idea of it.
Wonder why. Wonder why they didn't.
I don't know. I think they changed the story, the whole story of the way they were going to present the product. I think that's.
Well, also around this time, you wrote 2 scores for a couple of movies. Skid and Daddy Darling.
Yeah, Skid was only 8 minutes long, I think. But I sat through a John Wayne film in the Odeon Leicester Square in London with my parents just to watch this 8-minute film. My score. It was about autocross racing, you know.
Okay.
And Daddy Darling, I refer to it as my dirty Danish film. but the producer Ken Trodd and I got on really well, but everything was done on a budget, and so I used the regular musicians in the studio I'd recorded everything in. But some of that was quite funny because I had to go watch the cuts of the film, different scenes, to work out where to put the music. And the dialogue was with Danish actors speaking English, and then later on they overdubbed, I think, an American dialogue. But I remember there was one music cue. It was over a little bridge over a stream or a river, and the man says to the woman, "I want to marry you." And when that "I want to marry you," when that came out, Ken and I would just crease up laughing. And then there was one long sex scene, and I thought, well, one of the things I thought I'd use was tabla. So I got the drummer tapped on the studio floor. It was a long cue. It was about 11 minutes or 12 minutes long, perhaps even longer. So I'd worked out when the passion went up and then when it died down, when the passion went up and then when it died down. So Tat was on the floor going, ba-dum, ba-dum, ba-dum. At the end of it, the sweat was falling off. I've never seen the film, but apparently Joe Sarno is a cult film director now, the director of it. And I had a request from somebody in New York who was doing film studies and wanted to know about the score. I didn't know about this, that it was Joe Sarno was a cult film director of underground films.
Yeah. Well, what year was that movie was released?
I don't know. It was late 60s, 70 perhaps, something like that.
I wonder if you can find any clips on YouTube.
There will be clips on YouTube, I would think. I've never looked for them, though.
Okay. Very interesting, huh? The tablet. Now, this is what we spoke of before the interview, but you play guitar, but you also learn to play the ukulele. That's an interesting choice.
Well, I started ukulele when I was 8. I'd seen a ukulele in a shop, which was, I really, really wanted it. First of all, I wanted a trumpet, which was advertised in the boys' own paper or something, and it said, "Not a toy, a real musical instrument." Well, of course, it was a toy. It was a plastic, but my parents wouldn't buy it for me.
Mm-hmm.
But when I saw the ukulele, I really wanted that, and I got that for Christmas when I was 8,
Mm-hmm.
and that's what started it all off, I think, playing ukulele. And then later on, it became more popular, but I always played it fingerstyle. I never strummed it.
Okay.
But it was like playing a little high guitar, so I incorporated it, especially in songs from the liner. Yeah.
Right. I was going to say exactly. Do you? What is you played some interesting, looking on your site, interesting shaped guitars and that kind of thing.
Yes.
What's your favorite instrument to?
Well, I have a hand-built acoustic guitar made by Brook Guitars in Devon, and they make wonderful guitars, and they poured great scorn on my weird guitars. The first one was they're over there in the corner.
Okay.
Which corner? I can't remember which corner. Maybe behind the speaker. One was God, what was it? It's a Yamaha nylon strung, what do they call it? Travel guitar. So one half, it's like a skeleton guitar, and one half of the body comes off, so it goes into a little bag. And that's classical guitar with a flat fingerboard. And the sound's quite good. And the other one is a soloette. I forget what it's called now. And that's very basic. It's got a maple body, thin maple body, with a keyboard and just steel ends, but it's shaped so it's very, very comfortable. The tuners are at the bottom of the below the bridge, not at the top.
Not at the top.
So it looks very odd. Yeah, it's quite nice to play. But I used to use that especially if I was playing abroad, because it was easy to carry. And I could get it on planes easily.
Okay. Well, you mentioned earlier Jerry Braun. How did you come to sign a publishing deal with him?
Well, I had a friend. When I was at university, I had a friend who was doing research there. He'd been at Cambridge, and we became friends. And Tony Garnett, who then was a story editor for the BBC, working on the Wednesday play, which was a big deal, was up in Durham to see Sid. And Sid said, you ought to meet Tony. So he arranged an introduction. And Tony said, play something. And so I did. I played some songs. And he said, "I think you're very commercial." And I didn't know what he meant by commercial. Didn't mean me. He said, "If you're going to go into the business, you must go to London. It's no good being elsewhere at the time. And if you do, look me up and I'll see if I can help." And he was as good as his word. He was really, really helpful. By then, some of the demos that we'd made had got to another person who had owned a radio station. But Tony said, "I wouldn't go with him if I were you. He's dodgy. He's not a safe bet. You're best going to see." At the time, Tony was negotiating with Jerry Braun about the theme for the Wednesday play, and got Manfred to do that. So Manfred Mann wrote the Wednesday play tune. And 2 weeks after I should have signed the contract with the other bloke, he got shot murdered with a shotgun.
Oh man, okay.
So it's just as well I didn't go with him.
Right.
And so then I signed. Well, then I was with Jerry, and then signed a contract later on. But as I say, after the first hit, I had a dry period, and and I felt under pressure because I wasn't coming up with stuff. So it was really the second half of the 60s. Things just seemed to flow quite well.
I had kind of a offbeat question. In your hirsute days, which you're still enjoying, were you ever mistaken for Harry Nilsson?
No, but I have a almost story about Harry Nilsson, because I was very friendly with Danny Hutton of Three Dog Night.
Okay.
Danny used to come over, and he would go and see Jerry Bron, and occasionally he'd stay with me when I was living at Loudwater. And I used to say that Americans couldn't really drink, so I'd take him to the pub and get him drinking Abbot Ale, which was very strong. And I remember one evening I had him lying in front of my fire, completely out for the count on drinking Abbot Ale, for which I later wrote a song called Abbot of the Vale, which is about Abbot Ale. And then one evening, it was about 9 o'clock, and Danny said, "Come on, let's go into London," which was only, 19 miles away. Let's go into London and we look up Harry and go drinking with him.
Oh, okay.
And I said, no, I'm too tired. My life is full of things I wished I'd done and didn't do.
Uh-huh.
And that's one of them. I could have gone drinking. It would have been disastrous if we had. But I would have enjoyed it.
I would have liked to have seen the two of you side by side, you know.
Yeah. Great performer, great voice.
Oh yeah. And then of course he and John Lennon struck up that friendship. Yeah. Well, let's talk about your first album. Tony Hazzard sings Tony Hazzard.
Yeah.
And of course I have that on CD with the extra tracks.
Yeah.
My favorite song on there is Hello World. Yeah.
Oh, right.
Yeah, I love that track. That's got to be my favorite in there. Yeah. What's your take on that song?
Well, I didn't include it in my lyric book because that was written for when we was at the time in the UK when they were doing Eurovision. The Publishers Association, Music Publishers Association, would select, I think, about 8 songs that would be submitted, and then they would play them for the public do a performance in public. And then, so I thought this was after Candyman's Trumpet, or was it? Yeah, it was after it, I think. So I thought the obvious thing is Hello World.
Mm-hmm.
If it's Eurovision for the world. So that's why I wrote that. It was purely written for that. And then Mickey Mouse was one of the panel judges, and he was arguing with the others because he said, "You're rejecting songs that I think are hits." And one was Hello World, and one was a song by Greenaway and Cook, which later somebody else recorded, and it was a hit, and mine was a hit with the Tremeloes. But it didn't get to the Eurovision stage.
Wow. Yeah, Greenaway and Cook, great songwriter there too. Wrote for several artists. Yeah, great. Your second album, 1971's Loudwater House, did better than your first. And you mentioned earlier Mike Batt.
Yeah.
So that I see where the connection was there.
Yeah.
How was it working with him on that album?
It was fine. We were friends anyway.
Mm-hmm.
It worked very well. I think the arrangements he wrote were excellent. Really, really good. It was, for me, it was a bit of a, Jerry Bron came to me and he said, oh, crikey, it was somebody sending emails about nothing. Somebody saying, did you get my email about something by somebody I've never heard of? Anyway, Jerry had said after the hits, he said, why don't you go off and write an album and don't worry about being commercial. Well, I hadn't worried about being commercial. I'd just written what I wanted to write.
Mm-hmm.
So although before then I was starting to think, I'm a songwriter, therefore I must write songs. So it became, if the cat fits, wear it, just do it. Mm-hmm. Which is how I got into the songwriting, how I carried on anyway. Mm-hmm. And so I used, it was the breakdown of a relationship and the start of another, plus incidents to do with friends. So it was a very personal album, and I suppose a very self-indulgent album, because I sort of picked who I wanted to play on it, because I'd been doing one of the Elton John albums. I wanted some of the musicians. Right. So I wanted B.J. Cole on pedal steel.
Yeah.
Because I like pedal steel. And I wanted Caleb Quay on guitar, because nobody had played like Caleb. Nobody. You can hear his playing, and it stands out from anybody.
You're right. Yeah. Yep.
So and then B.J. Cole was playing in a band called Cochise. So he brought the drummer, Roy Otemro, and there was a session player called Tony Campo. He was a lovely chap. And I never forget, the first session was Blue Movie Man. And I arrived at the studio, and the musicians were all there, and the room smelt very pungently. I thought, oh dear, it's going to be a disaster. And I played them the track, and it was all done in 40 minutes, the backing track. It's quite amazing, despite being stoned, despite the fact that Roy, the drummer, was so stoned he couldn't pack his gear up at the end, and Cochise had a gig up the motorway to play that night. So we worked from 2 till 8. But I loved the band. They were great musicians.
And another individual that you brought in, I assume, as a backing vocalist, Leslie Duncan.
Yeah.
Yeah. She's a great singer, songwriter in her own right.
Yeah.
And sad that she passed away so young. Well, but yeah, she was, I noticed that on there looking at all the musicians, and quite a few people worked on that album. But
yeah. We'd been very good friends. We were very good friends for a long time. And she used to book me to sing on backing vocal sessions, which were quite fun. We used to go over to Hamburg and sing on James Last records. Okay. Of course, James Last in the UK was very uncool. It was from mums and dads. The reality was he was a great musician. He had a great band, and he was a great arranger. Right. So we'd go over there and be treated like gods and goddesses. We all, wonderful food and all that. He treated us very well.
Yeah. Go ahead. Did you have something else?
No, okay. No, not really. No.
I was going to mention my favorite song on this album is "Another Day Will Come."
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a great track. My second favorite is the title track.
Loudon's House, yeah.
Yeah, but I also like Sarah's Birthday and Redwood's Back Home.
Yeah.
Another good
Sarah's Birthday, it's interesting because she lives in Boston now.
Okay.
And while she was young, they used to play that song every year on her birthday.
Is that right?
Yeah, and then I forget when it was. It must have been end of the 80s, was it? Early 90s. She was getting married, and they wanted me to attend the wedding. And I was acting in a play locally at an open air theatre here. I said, I can't. I've got to be on, big rehearsal at 10 o'clock on Sunday morning. That's all right. We'll fly you up. And at the time, Sarah's stepmother was very, very wealthy. So I flew up to Gatwick. There was a car waiting for me, and we drove to the church in Sussex, and I saw this woman. I said, "You're Peggy, aren't you?" And she said, "Yes, you're Tony, aren't you?" And then we had cars to go to the reception, which was set in a castle. So we went over the cars went over the drawbridge, this great castle. There was a string quartet playing on the lawn, and Sarah's mother was a friend of mine. And I said, "Where am I staying?" She said, "You're staying here." Well, that's all right. and so then the reception was in a big marquee, and there was another big marquee for where there was going to be dancing in the evening and food. So at the reception, I'd rewritten the words for Sarah's birthday. Sarah Melissa, it's your wedding today. Instead of your birthday today. So I thought, if I can hold it together, I'll do it. So I played it. Everybody was in tears. They were all very moved by it. And then in the evening at the disco, I said to Peggy, "Did you do all this?" She said, "It's my wedding present. And you might, if you go to San Francisco, come over and stay with me. You'd be very welcome." Of course, I never did. It was one of the regrets, you know.
Wow. Well, that was like a true fairy tale wedding right there.
Absolutely. One of the other regrets, just reminded me of one, was I was going to, I think it was the late 70s. I was going over to LA, I think. And a friend of mine in the pub where I used to drink was very friendly. His name was Chris Dunhill. He was related to the Dunhill Lighters people. And he was very friendly with James Griffin, Jimmy Griffin of Bread.
Bread, yeah.
I was a great fan of Bread. And he said, if you go over there, here's his phone number. You must go and see him. So I went over there and I thought, James Griffin doesn't know me for Adam. So I never phoned him. I went back and Chris said to me, "You didn't phone him, did you? He's waiting for you to phone him." That's one regret, because I love his voice.
Yeah, yeah.
So that, you know, that's one of the stupid things, you know. I should have done it.
Yeah, well, I mean, David Gates, you know, was basically Bread, but James Griffin wrote several really nice songs. And like you said, his vocals.
Look, What You've Done is one of my favorites.
Yeah, right.
That's him. I didn't realize it was him singing, but it was. The other regret, similarly, when I was in Nashville, a girl there invited me to a ranch in Texas. Her husband was there. It wasn't a pickup or anything. Come over and write. And I said, "No, I've got to go on to wherever. I'm going on to LA from Nashville." So I did. I should have gone. Why didn't I go?
Right. Do you recall whereabouts in Texas? Or?
No, I can't remember. But there's another woman in LA. The next day was going to Mexico. She said, "Why didn't you come?" I said, "No, I've got to go home." I thought, what? Why didn't I go to Mexico with this woman?
Yeah, I know. I've had those kind of instances too in life. But have you ever been to Mexico?
No.
Okay.
I mean, I wrote a song about it, but
right. I was going to say, yeah. So that's how you long for Mexico.
Yeah.
Well, I wanted to hear a little bit about in the interim. You did provide backing vocals on Tumbleweed Connection and Honky Chateau.
And Elton John, the first one, yeah.
And the first one, that's right.
Yeah.
I omitted that. How was it working on those albums?
Well, Elton had been singing with us in doing backing vocals. So we were quite used to him because he wasn't well known at the time.
Right.
I remember one session, he came to a session, he said, "I did a gig in Brighton last night." And we said, "How did it go?" He said, "It was great, just him on a piano." And so when he started recording with Gus Dudgeon, he said, I'm doing this album. Will you come and sing? We said, of course, yeah. And I remember going to the first session for the Elton John Dark album. And I'm thinking, wow, sounds so good.
Right.
The backing tracks were so good.
Mm-hmm. I still think that's one of his best.
Yeah.
If not his best. Go ahead.
And then it was Tumbleweed Connection. I think, was it Dusty Springfield sang on Tumbleweed Connection? I can't remember, but I know Elton was a big fan of hers. And she came to the session and she was delightful. She was standing next to me while we were singing. And she said, I don't think I can do this. And I'm thinking, you're Dusty Springfield. What do you mean you can't do this? And I just said, of course you can. You'll be fine. Don't worry. Mm-hmm. Of course she was fine. She was lovely, though.
Right. I've heard stories too about that, about established artists and how nervous they still get after they've been singing for years or whatever in front of a microphone or an audience.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah. You still hear stories about that. Was That All Right Then, your third album from 1973?
Yeah.
I think you mentioned this one earlier. I think I'm Over Getting Over You.
Yeah.
I think that has to be one of your finest songs that you've written.
My nephew loves this. My nephew, Liverpudlian chap, absolutely adores it. Mm-hmm. And that was written, about a real person. Mm-hmm. So there's an awful lot in the words that makes sense. It was largely written in Mallorca.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Yeah.
Hence, Underneath the Lemon Trees, Gazing Far Out to Sea. I was staying in Mallorca at the time. And I think that's my favorite album.
Yeah.
Because I had, what was I going to say about it? Though the reason for the title was, when we were recording it, sometimes I'd have to fit sessions in when I could at the studio. And sometimes if I was doing vocal sessions, they'd say, we could do it at 6 o'clock in the morning. And I was up at Loudwater and I'd have to get up at 4:30 to get to the session. And it'd just be me and the engineer. So I'd do a vocal and I'd say, was that all right then? He said, come and have a listen. And then because nobody bought Loudwater House, the other thing was, well, was that all right then?
Yeah. Yeah.
Melody Maker reviewed it and said, Tony Hazzard, was that all right then? No, it wasn't. Try again. I used to quote this. I thought, hang on a minute. This is not a bad album. The playing is superlative. There's really good musicians playing on it, and it still stands up. And I always remember two things. Somebody once said critics are like eunuchs in a harem. They've seen it done. They know how to do it, but they can't do it themselves.
Right.
And the other one was a story of Salvador Dali, who was being interviewed, and his secretary came in with quotes, with magazine, newspaper interviews and things, and he'd look through them and count them and give them back to her. And the interviewer said, "Are you not interested in hearing what people say about you?" He said, "No, not at all. I just want to know that they're talking about me." And I thought that's a very good attitude. And I realized that probably the Melody Maker critic, I heard that a lot of critics on music papers were would-be musicians. And I think Island Records, some people would go to the studio at lunchtime, to record something. They wanted to be musicians, but didn't ever make it. And I thought, well, hang on a minute. I've written it. I've published it. I'm singing on it. I've written arrangements. I was very pleased with the arrangement, the string arrangement of I Think I'm Getting Over You. Mm-hmm. And when we did the string overdubs, the cellist came into the control room and said, I really love the cello part. It's really good. And I was really pleased about that.
Mm-hmm.
To have a professional musician saying he liked the way I'd written the part. It was very nerve-wracking conducting, though.
Yeah, interesting. You talk about critics. You know, I think the worst thing is to happen to an artist is just to be completely ignored. You know,
yeah,
not any negative criticism. Any kind of criticism, positive or negative, is good. You know, at least it gets you noticed.
Yeah,
and it gets people talking about you. But just to be completely overlooked, that's got to be the worst. You know. But I also like from that album, Mama. Mama is a good, good track on there. And,
yeah, I wrote the arrangement for that, I remember.
Mm-hmm. And,
I can't do that now. I've forgotten how to do it.
And
Nana Muscuri recorded that, did a very good version of it.
Okay. I had to ask you about what Paul McCartney had to say about your song.
I don't know. Somebody told me he'd heard it and liked it, but I don't know. I don't know.
You never heard anything.
I never heard if he commented on it. Whether he might have done, I don't know.
Yeah, that's interesting. Then a little bit later in 1976, you recorded the album with Richard Barnes.
Yeah.
Titled, strangely enough, Hazzard and Barnes.
Yeah.
Go figure. Again, you both did a great version of Take to the Mountains. But Warning Lights is my favorite off of that album.
Yeah, we like that. We recorded that at Sawmill Studios in Cornwall as a demo. I'd just done it with a guitar, and Richard and I got together because he'd sung on all the demos. He was the automatic go-to harmonizer. So we thought we'd do this album. We used to go around London, make appointments with record companies. And it got to the point where we'd say, are you able to make decisions? Because if you can't, we don't want to talk to you. Because there were a lot of younger people. They didn't know what I'd written. They didn't know that Richard had played Jesus in Jesus Christ Superstar in the West End or anything about him. So, and we used to, get to people who thought, what's the point of Acid? So eventually we saw Peter Swetnam at Warner Brothers and we said, can you make decisions? He said, yes. I said, oh, right, off you go then. So he produced the album.
Yeah, the harmonizing on that song is just crystal clear. It's so.
The funny thing is when we recorded the album at Air Studios, and we couldn't do it as well as the demo. So Jerry Boyes, the engineer, said, let's use the demo, we'll add on to it. So we used the original demo.
Okay.
Songs, yeah.
Okay. Very interesting. The next following year, 1977, when you won a citation of achievement from BMI for your song Fox on the Run. Were you surprised that the song became such a huge bluegrass standard?
Yeah, it's funny, I was moving house when I got this invitation to this awards banquet in Nashville. And I thought, well, I don't know what this is about at all. So what's the point of me going? What should have happened is Jerry Bron should have paid for me to go to Nashville to the awards banquet. But I don't know if he knew, but I don't know what happened. Many years later, I saw that awards banquet with Chris Christopherson going up to get an award. And that was where I should have been, because it was unusual for an English songwriter to have written something like that.
Right. Very true. Yeah. Well, have you ever been mistaken for Chris Christopherson? That's another. he had the kind of.
People used to say I look like Kenny Rogers.
Kenny Rogers.
When I had more hair, yeah.
Right. I could see that too. Well, the original version though of that song is my favorite because it's got the more pop oriented sound, you know. I have to confess, I'm not a huge fan of bluegrass music. So I think that's why I prefer your original version.
Yeah, yeah.
But I can see listening to it why it did become, such a bluegrass standard.
Yeah, I did an interview, an American interview, and they wanted to know, what happened to the girl, and that's when I had to confess and say that was just my imagination. I had this scene in my mind of golden corn going down to the river, and many years later, I went to a Tudor house not far from me, and we went round the corner. And there was the river. There was the river, and with reeds going down to it. And I said that was the scene I had in my mind when I wrote Fox on the Run.
Okay, wow.
So that it was that was imagined. It was all imagined.
Mm-hmm. Wow. Well, it's effective, that's for sure.
Apart from raising the glass, and that was real.
Right, it was real. Then for a time, you managed a drug and alcohol rehab clinic.
Yeah.
How did you get involved with that?
Well, I got stale in my writing. I thought this was in the early 80s, and I thought I'd better stop this for a while and do something else. And one of the subjects I'd done at university was psychology. I was interested in looking at psychotherapy and counselling. Mm-hmm. So I went on several courses, which was, the first one was very experiential. You had to go through the process. We worked in group therapy every week, and that was quite intense. At the end of the day, you were exhausted. Mm-hmm. And we worked with different therapists at weekends, and that did an awful lot of good. By then it became automatic. And so I started seeing clients, and then they were looking for a new treatment director, and they wanted somebody with a degree and who was used to working in groups. So I fitted the bill, and I did that for 7 years. And then we had a new chief executive who wasn't really interested. He was an ex-military man. And I thought, I can't do this anymore. So I left. And then that's when I started recording songs from the liner. And then later on, I was asked by the previous chief executive who got sacked. He wasn't any good. Well, I knew he wasn't any good. He was just very tall with a military bearing. They always go for the tall ones, and I wasn't. So the then chief executive, who was a friend of mine, I'd originally employed, said, would you work at the men's unit temporarily? I'm in a bit of a crisis. Mm-hmm. So on Monday, this was on Thursday, so I started on Monday. I went in to manage this residential unit. And in a way, I liked it far better than being treatment director for the whole caboodle, because I was working closer with the clients. And really liked that until I was doing too much, and I got ill, so I had to leave. I had a stroke, in fact, but I never talk about that.
Okay. Well, do you remember any success stories in the rehab?
Oh yes, but when we used to get visitors, and they would say, "What's your success rate?" And I would say, "I can alter the success rate depending on how we take people in." I say, for example, anybody can come in at the moment. Some people will come to the door and register, and then say, "I don't want to stay," and walk out. Mm-hmm. So we include those or they might stay for a week or 2 weeks. Mm-hmm. We knew from the research, I brought in a research psychologist, and we knew that after 2 weeks, treatment would have an effect on people. But with addiction, you can't, it's not black or white. You could never, it's never absolute and we were working with abstinence. Some people in the city were working with harm reduction, but we were working with abstinence. But eventually we worked out. So I said, all I have to do is change the criteria. We know the sort of people that do well here. So I can just admit those people and we'll have a really good success rate. So it's meaningless to say, you know, but there are people still today who get in touch and say, thank you. I always say they did the work. You know, we just sort of nudged them.
Right, right. Yeah, I like to hear that. That must have been at the time pretty rewarding, but I know it was very draining on you.
The worst thing about it was commuting.
Okay.
I hated the drive. It was 26 miles in, and I hated the drive in the rush hour.
Yeah.
That was more tiring than anything.
The job was.
And later with the men's unit, I was working with some very, very naughty people, but I really liked them. They had lots of character. And I was very fond of them.
Yeah. You get attached.
Yeah.
Yeah, you would. Well, jumping from that into another area, you also wrote some articles and short stories for different publications. Any memorable ones?
Well, I had a good friend, Graham, who subsequently died with a heart condition, and he and his wife were sort of jobbing writers. They would write whatever the subject was, they would write a book about it. And they were commissioned to write a book on dream interpretation. And they didn't know anything about dreams, but they knew that I did. So they said, will you write an introduction? So I wrote about Jungian and Freudian dream interpretation. And that was half the book. And they just did a sort of dream dictionary. If you dream of an owl, it means this. It was all sort of made up. But they said, will you put your name to it? Because if we can't do interviews on dreams because we don't know anything about them. So I was doing long distance phone calls. It was very strange at the time. I was moving house, and I bought a barn up the side of a hill, and was converting it. I was living in the caravan at the time, so I was doing a long distance phone call to London, analysing dreams. People would phone in with their dreams, and I have to do dream interpretation on the spot, which was quite difficult. So that was one. At the same time, my friend Graham had a New York agent, and he said, she's coming to Cornwall. Will you give her a cup of tea? I said, of course. And she contacted me, and I said, I do some writing. So I'd written some short stories and showed them to her. And one she really liked. And she said, I've got an editor in publishing in New York who's very into Jung. Could you extend this short story into a novel with a Jungian feel? And I said, yeah. So I started to do it. And I wrote another chapter, which I don't think was very good because I was using dialogue, and I wasn't very good with dialogue at the time. And then I got the invitation to become the treatment director. And suddenly it was a toss-up between the creative life and steady money. And I should have finished the novel. to have an agent in New York with a random house, would have been, that could have been really the start of something very different. But I went for the ready money. I thought it's nice to have regular money and know what it's going to be. Because with songwriting, you never know. I remember one year at the beginning, I thought I was getting a royalty check, and I thought this might be enough to have a good Christmas. I got a check for £8. What's £8? $10 or something? I don't know. Yeah. So you never know. You could never tell what you were going to get. Right. I've had good surprises the other way too. But...
Well, do you mind if I ask you, talking about dream interpretation, if I give you a couple of mine? Do you mind?
Go on.
Okay.
I'm very rusty. But go on.
just for the heck of it, right? These are the two recurring, I would say 80 to 90% of my dreams are more nightmares than dreams.
Yeah.
They're not. But two recurring themes are, one, I take my car somewhere, I park it, and then I can't find it. I spend the whole dream trying to locate my car, okay? Or a similar one is trying to find my way home. I will go somewhere, I know how to get back, I know the roads to get there, but every path that I take takes me off in a different direction, and I become frustrated throughout the whole dream trying to get back home, okay?
Let's take the car.
That's the one. Okay, go ahead. You want to take that one?
I mean, the car is used, transport is usually a sign of how you're going through life.
Right.
And it depends what sort of, if it's on a train, a railway, it's quite fixed. In a car, you've got more flexibility. So it's how you're going through life. So what happens, you park your car and you can't remember where it is.
Right.
So if you're going through life and you're thinking, where do I go from here? How do I get to where I want to get to?
Right.
The other good thing is to do a gestalt thing where you tell your dream and then you tell your dream again from the aspect of something in the dream. You could tell the dream as the car. I'm a car and Greg is driving me. But he doesn't know where I am. And see how that
car's perspective. Yeah.
But so if the car says, Greg doesn't know where I am, how does that apply to you going through life? Do you know where you are? Should you be doing something else?
Right. I think it is a lot of me second guessing myself, and it's coming up in the dreams. The other recurring dream that I have, very frustrating, is I'm taking a test or a final exam for material that I haven't studied for. So it's like that feeling of going in there, it's the day of the test, the exam, and I didn't study, I'm going to fail it. I have that nightmare a lot.
I had that for years after leaving university. Okay. Went on for years. It was actually true. It never left. No, I think that's a standard, just a standard thing that, I should be doing better than I am, or, I should have worked more and I haven't. And just a standard anxiety dream.
Right.
But the other one's interesting is in terms of how you're going through life and where you want to get to, or I can't find my means of getting to where I want to.
Right. I had a feeling, but I wanted to get your 2 cents.
Did it synchronize with what you thought?
Yes, in a way it did. Yes.
Okay.
Transportation, the car, the way, like you said, the way going, how you maneuver through life. Yeah. It kind of did. So, I'm enjoying the interviews. I really am. So in a way, I think I may have found a little bit of my calling. However late in life it is.
Yeah.
I think that's one thing to be said. Well, let's jump ahead to songs from the liner, 2011. The Venturer has to be my favorite.
Yeah.
On that one. But I also like Julia's song and Won't Lie Down, or two really nice tracks.
Yeah. A lot of people like The Venture. Of course, that's another one. I didn't realize I'd already recorded it. That was in my, I forgot what it's called now. It was an extended EP. It's on my Bandcamp site.
Okay.
And it's called The Lost Groundhouse Tapes.
Yes. Right.
So there's a very dramatic version there, with Dave Mattox playing drums and Dave Greenslade playing synth. It's very, very early 80s synth driven. And but I couldn't remember recording it. So when I did it, Songs from the Line, I played everything myself. So it took quite a long, it was several years to do. So I'd started recording it, and then I had the stroke, and that messed things up a bit. I could play the guitar, but I couldn't play the mandolin the way I had before. So that was tricky. And it took ages, because by the end of it, I didn't want to do something like that again, because I bought a camera and did all the photography. This is before smartphones. I bought a SLR camera, took all the photographs for the cover, and I got frustrated because I thought, I'm not a photographer. Why am I doing this? And I had to do all the office type stuff that record companies have to do, and I just found, I forget what they are, the numbers that identify the tracks. And I got very tough by the end of it. I thought, I don't want to do that again. But I played it the other day, and I thought, I quite like this. Mm-hmm. I mean, I did like Won't Lie Down. Mm-hmm. Somebody said you can't write things like that because it's anti-feminist. I couldn't see that at all. The idea was based on, as a kid, we used to play cowboys on the air raid shelters at school, in the primary school. And, you had to be, if you were shot, you had to be dead.
Yeah.
Yeah. And there was a certain amount of time you were dead, and then you'd get up and join in again.
Right.
So when the Young Cowboys games, the shot ones get blamed when they won't lie down. Lie down. And I thought the idea of a girl getting pregnant, but the boyfriend, she wouldn't lie down to make love, but eventually she does and gets pregnant. She has the baby, and the baby won't lie down. He's crying all the time. And then the last thing is feelings may change, but the memories remain, and they won't lie down.
Right. Yeah, I like
so your feelings, yeah. So I was quite pleased with that, and I like the arrangement with the mandolins and things.
Oh yeah, the mandolin.
Yeah.
It's always nice sound on that. Well, yeah, you mentioned that the Lost Roundhouse tapes. That version of the Venture is really well produced. I think.
Yeah.
I like it on there too. In 2016, the Halicum, is that how you pronounce it?
Halicum, yeah.
Halicum Sessions.
Yeah.
Now these are more intimate songs. Basically, you and the acoustic guitar.
Yeah. What had happened was I'd had a request from a man in San Sebastian in northern Spain who had a club called what was it called? Club 47. I keep forgetting. What it was, there used to be there was, or still is, I don't know, a radio station in San Sebastian playing 70s music. And he loved 60s and 70s music. So people would pay 10 euros a month, and they would pull the money together, hire a place, and get somebody to perform. So he said, will you come and play at this pop-up club? So I said, yes. And of course we didn't, I looked him up on the internet and seen that he wasn't an axe murderer. He actually wore a suit. Was it because he was a lawyer?
Yeah.
He was professor of international law at the university.
Really? Okay.
But he said, I've been a fan of yours. I've listened to your music from the age of 14 with friends and lovers. He was then in his 50s. I thought that was a lovely, and I had so many fans there. I'd go over there and be wined and dined and not allowed to spend money. They would, the food was wonderful. And then I come back home to normality. And while I was over there, I met an American called Matt Harding, who was about 6'4", I think, 6'3", I don't know, but a big man with a big beard. And we became great friends. And he's a great musician and a great songwriter and a great singer. And it got to the point where he was going to move back to Utah, where he came from. But we thought we may not see each other again. So we arranged for him to come over. He got the ferry over from Santander in northern Spain to Plymouth. And he was only coming for a week. And we were just going to, we didn't know what we were going to do. He'd never been to the UK, he'd never been to an English pub. He wanted to do all these things. He had it in his head that he'd like to record a very, very simple, intimate recording with me. And I was thinking, I don't ever want to produce anything myself again because it's exhausting. Yeah. So without actually admitting it, he wanted to produce, and that's what happened. He brought some recording equipment. I got recording equipment. So we set it up, and I just play, I just start playing. And then we go and sit outside and he have a cigarette. And in the evening, we go to the pub and drink beer. And he really enjoyed the pub, and he really enjoyed the sense of humor in the pub. And then I was taking him through the woods, my woods, which go down to the River Liner. Mm-hmm. And I said, that field over there, I said, all the fields have names in 1821, and that one was called Hallicum. Mm-hmm. And he found that interesting. So when he came back, he just wrote on the files, the Hallicum sessions. Okay. We said, well, let's call it that. So I took a photograph of the Hallicum field with the sheep in. And then I found what was it? I forget what they call it, when they assay farms to see what tithes should be paid in 1821.
Oh yeah, what was that? Yeah.
And so on the back of the album it says Hallicum was worth X amount of money, 2 shillings and something, so many acres, and it was worth so much. So that's why we did that. But a lot of it was very rough, and I made mistakes. And Matt said, no, don't add any more. Leave it. I said, I can do that much better. And so for the song, Another Day Will Come, he said, you don't like people hearing your vulnerability, do you? I said, no, of course I don't. He said, but that's what is appealing about it. So that's how that was done, very simply, just with the ukulele.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well,
and then we overdubbed odd things. He would overdub guitar or a harmony or bongos on thing, I think. But it was done very, and then we did a very strange thing. By then he was back in San Sebastian, and he had a friend with a studio in Utah. So we did the mix and mastering. Well, we're on like a Zoom, I think we were on Zoom or FaceTime or WhatsApp. He's in San Sebastian, northern Spain. I'm in Cornwall, and the other chap's in the studio in Utah. Mm-hmm. So he'd send us the mixes, and then we'd have a listen, say a little bit more of that, and that's how that. But it's very, very. Matt loves it. He likes it, but for me, it's a bit too raw.
Uh-huh. Well, in listening to it, I didn't hear any mistakes.
Well, in the Spice Trader, the Spice Trader came up from me wanting to write a folk song. Mm-hmm. And how did it start? I wanted to see if I could write a folk song that sounded like a folk song. So that's how that initially, that was the idea. And then I thought, if he's a spice trader, I'd use the spice in it. Mm-hmm. The idea of spice. So I did a bit of research on spice, the spice trade, and then wrote this story about a classical folk tale of a man falls in love with a woman abroad, brings her back, marries her, and she goes off and is unfaithful with the son of a vicar, with a clergyman, and he finds him and kills her and kills him. And then he's in Newgate jail, he's going to be hanged. Mm-hmm. But there was a line in it. What was the line? It was a key line about I saw the light of her cinnamon skin as a silken dress unfurled. And I thought that was very sensual and very sexy.
Right.
I caught sight of cinnamon skin.
Cinnamon is a spice.
Yeah.
Yeah.
As a silken dress unfurled. So there are lots of references to that sort of thing. And there's a line in it about the tricorn tree. Tyburn, where they hang people, was at Marble Arch at the end of Oxford Street, and it was on three legs. It was called the Tyburn tree. So that's the meaning for that. And then I got a friend who was staying in the caravan to sing the last verse as if it's the woman's ghost singing. Mm. So she's singing slightly different words. I'm singing, I caught sight, and then you caught sight, or he caught sight of my cinnamon,
Right. Yeah, I think, you mentioned.
But I fluffed the words. I fluffed one of the words completely.
Oh, okay. Yeah. Murder is a common thread in folk music.
Yeah.
It really is. And ghosts as well.
Yeah.
But off of that album, I think Journey's End is my top pick.
Yeah. You see, I did that before on the one with Richard Barnes, but I didn't like that as I played it on my own.
Right.
I worked a solo out for it.
Right.
And that was about a genuine incident of, at one point I didn't live anywhere. I just put stuff in the car and stayed with friends and stayed in hotels and pubs and drove around the countryside. So that's how that
came about.
Yeah.
And Loving on the Run is nice. Old Wave also. And that shows up on a couple of your.
The Old Wave is there's a mighty version on the Roundhouse tapes, right. And at the beginning of that, the tape was damaged. I had to have the tapes baked they were done in the early 80s, and I had to have them rescued. But at the beginning, it starts with fuzz guitar, and it sounds like an H-bomb going off. Tape's damaged, but I think it works very well.
Yeah. You wouldn't know that unless you heard the story behind it. Yeah. That's interesting. And then you mentioned this one earlier. I'll Be Still in Love with You.
Yeah.
That's
for me, one of the things for that was I sort of borrowed the feel of Silver Threads Among the Gold. Mm-hmm. Darling, you are growing old, silver threads among the gold. And I like that's a very, very sad, sad song of somebody being old. And so I'll be still in love with you. There was an echo of Silver Threads Among the Gold. But I wanted to be the sort of, it's about the human condition. Now, the world it turns, people live and die. Mm-hmm. Stars are in their rightful places. At the evening sun and the morning dew, I'll be still in love with you. There's a bit of a hint of the remembrance service in that we just had over here. At the going down of the sun, and at the going down of the sun, we will remember them. When the evening comes, the night is new, I'll be still in love with you. And then what's the second verse? As the years roll by and our troubles too, and we smooth the edges off life's complications. If we're far apart, or together too, I'll be still in love with you. Mm-hmm. And the rolling years make it plain to see that I'm an ordinary man in many ways. But the thought of you still possesses me, and I wouldn't have it any other way. I've taken that recording and I've actually added computerized strings and a piccolo trumpet on it as a variation of it. I haven't got it the way I want it yet, but I will do. And then the last verse is when we're old and grey and our children grown and the mark of time is written on our faces. So it's gone right from the beginning to the end of life.
Mm-hmm.
So I think it's one of my best songs, I think.
Yeah, I do too. Appreciate you sharing the lyrics again too, to remind people of that. You mentioned earlier too about the venture off of the Lost Roundhouse tapes.
Yeah.
Dreams of Leaving, I think, is a good song.
It's on the Lost Roundhouse tapes. Yeah, that's I was really pleased with that. I was going to record it again, but I couldn't do it as well as we did it. Because Dave Greenslade is playing a synthesizer like a low flute, very simply all the way through.
Yeah.
And it's interesting in the chorus where Dave Mattox stops playing drums, only punctuates them. And no, I'm very pleased with that. I was pleased with the song.
Yeah, a few other songs on that do have that big 80s sound, you know.
Yeah.
But those two, The Venture and Dreams of Leaving, could have been on any other album too.
Yeah,
been quality, you know, I think. But I like both of those.
I played Dreams of Leaving to the sister of a girl I was going out with at the time. She lived in a cottage by the sea. We sat outside on the lawn and I played her the song. And the tears just rolled down her cheeks. Because it was very pertinent. So I was very pleased with that.
Oh, yeah. Well, you know, any song that touches the emotions,
the
heart of the listener, you know you've made that connection.
Yeah.
That's when it's really special, really. Last year you self-published your book, Selected Lyrics. You want to hold that up? There it is. Yeah.
Close to have to get about there. Yeah.
Yeah. So you look like a professor there.
Yeah. That was a portrait of me by a local artist. It was when I was the treatment director then. So.
Okay.
Yeah. I just decided. I wanted to do two things. I wanted to do demonstration because I'd got the original full track tapes, and I wanted to do selected lyrics, and then that was it. I wasn't doing anything else, and I've achieved that, so I'm quite pleased with it. Not that many people. Decided to publish it on Amazon because I got tired of going to the post office 5 miles away down narrow lanes. I hate driving now, and I didn't want to, to pack up a book and drive and then post it to wherever it was. And if it was in abroad, there's more money going out. And with Amazon, it's always available. So Matt, who in Utah, who's actually now in Brazil, could get hold of it, and Juan in San Sebastian could get hold of it. So it's available all around the world whenever you want it.
And it's gotten some good reviews too.
Oh, on Amazon, yeah. And I don't know the people that, they're genuine.
Yeah, they're not bots or anything like that. You mentioned demonstration. Basically, your first album, one track with a couple added.
Yeah.
And then remastering the demos to complete.
Remixing them.
Yeah,
I was offered the chance to buy 27 4-track tapes from the studio in the 60s. Otherwise, they were going to be thrown away.
Oh, okay.
So I thought, I've got to get them. So I bought them. They're all cluttering up the end room at the moment. And then I didn't know what to do. I looked around for a 4-track tape recorders in studios. And there was one in the East End of London. But the chap there was very anti-digital. He couldn't touch digital at all.
Okay.
And And I thought it's going to be too difficult. And the only other machine I could get hold of was at Abbey Road, and they were charging a lot of money. And then somebody said there's a company in West London who does, they will use the tape to make music files, good quality music files. So I selected, I had photographs of the back of the tapes sent, so I could see what, I'd also already got the tapes, so I could see what was what. So I had some of those translated into music files. Mm. And then I thought, I played around with them, but I didn't know what to do. I thought, what's the point of putting it out? And then I thought, no, this is too good. It's like a historical document. Mm-hmm. I didn't have the sound of the Candyman's trumpet because that was recorded later at another studio, but I had 2 other demos. So I put those on, and I got Jerry Boyes, who's a really good engineer. Jerry has mixed lots of very well-known people, including the Buena Vista Social Club. Mm-hmm. He recorded that with Ry Cooder in Havana. And he's got a very, very good ears, and he lives up the road from, a few miles from me in Cornwall. And he really enjoyed doing it. But one of the problems was we didn't want to just, in the late 60s, if people did stereo, they wanted to show off the stereo. So you'd have things like drums on one side and bass on the other, and it would be all mixed up. Mm-hmm. So we decided to go for just a good sound, even if it ended up being mono. Mm-hmm. So that's what we went for. And also I wanted it to be, as I say, a historical document. So I managed to get photographs that the bass player had taken during the sessions, black and white pictures. And so I made a, what do they call it, when they mix all photographs together?
Like a collage?
Collage, that's the word. Collage. And also we used them to show off who was playing on the album. And I also wanted to include some of the studio sounds. So the album opens with Tom, one of the engineers, saying, what does he say? The matter with you, first 4/4, take 1. Now we used 2 4-track Studer machines. So we'd record something on the 4 tracks, then mix those down to, say, 2 tracks on the other. So we could add vocals and whatever on. And in fact, the other thing that's mentioned on the album is I went to the studio one morning, and Adrian, the engineer, said, guess who we had in here last night? I said, we said we had the Beatles all night recording. Mm. So I discovered they were recording Fixing a Hole on Sgt. Pepper. But I couldn't remember when it was. So meanwhile, I made contact with Mark Lewison, who's writing a mammoth book about the Beatles. I don't know if you know about it. Mm. But it is the definitive history of the Beatles. First volume, there's a short version and a long version. We were exchanging, we followed each other on Twitter, and I said, why are you following me? And he said, because I grew up with your songs and I loved them. Mm-hmm. He said, I really think you ought to buy the book. And I said, look, when you've lived through those times, it becomes part of your life. It's not legendary to me, it just was the way it was. He said, I think you'll find lots of connections growing up in the same area round about the same time. So I bought the short version, which was 900 pages long.
Whoa, okay.
Right, so if you think of most novels as being 270 pages long, 900 pages. The long version was 1,600 pages long.
Oh, epic.
And that only takes you to the release of Love Me Do in 62.
Really?
Yeah. Wow. So it's called Tune In, Turn On, Drop Out, the 3 volumes.
Okay.
So I had to email him and say, I said, Mark, when was the session at Regent Sound? And he told me Friday the whatever it was. So I could tell that's when they recorded it, over the Thursday to the Friday, and I came in a few hours afterwards to do one of the tracks on the album.
Mm-hmm.
So that was a little bit of cultural history from that time. And I just wanted, just things like sounds of the studio, countings. Some countings I didn't include.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm pleased that that's come out. Yeah.
Yeah, it takes you back to, like you said, the original sessions, and keeps it quite alive too.
Yeah.
They've been remixed.
Yeah.
But one of the added tracks on there that I quite liked was How She's Making Out.
Yes, I like that. But Jerry Bron had put it out as a single, and I've got an arranger in to put strings on it, which really spoiled it. These strings go, rup, 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 really work. I like the original demo. I like Roger's solo, so I wanted to go back to the original demo.
Have you noticed any feedback, any younger audience or
no
that are getting into your music lately?
No, I think I don't really follow it, so I haven't heard from the record company. I was really pleased with the record company. Did everything I wanted. I wanted to have a gatefold sleeve album, and they did everything else. So I was really pleased about that. I just wanted that to be done. That's it. I can sit and drink gin and tonic and
right.
Stay at home.
Right. Any interests that you have these days?
It's mostly reading. And there are certain things I like to watch on television, which are a little bit eccentric. So,
well, Tony, can you think of anything else you'd like to throw in or add?
I'll probably think of it in half an hour.
Right. That's how I am. I should have said this. I should have asked him this. Right.
You can always ask me. You can always email and ask Paul. Yeah.
Right. That's what we'll do. I just wanted to say this has been very relaxing talking to you. Have you had that assessment of your personality before in the past, saying that you're very easygoing, very laid back?
Yes. People say I'm very relaxing to be with. Yeah.
Yes. You've had that effect on me.
Yeah, that's good.
Yeah. And
I used to be a good therapist and counselor.
There you go. There you go. That's where it comes in. Yeah. Yeah. Well, it has been very, very enjoyable and relaxing. I must say that. Okay. Well, I will be in touch and let you know when I've edited and it's live. I've posted it so you can tell everybody about it or whatever. All right. Well,
thanks very much.
Sure. And I did enjoy it, and thank you again, Tony.
No problem. Thanks, Greg.
All righty.